This summer, I went abroad to experience the British Isles and discover more about marine conservation. This was a once in a lifetime experience for me, from the picturesque train ride through the Scottish countryside from Glasgow to Oban to meeting the cutest Highland cows ever, and I mean ever, to hiking the length of an island to see the remains of a 16th century castle on this beautiful, beautiful hillside, then to seeing pods of dolphins from the bow of a ship swimming magically around me, and then to sailing to the Isle of Lunga, where I got to see what I imagined were the most amount of puffins ever in real life, which I don't think is true, but there were so many puffins. But beyond these experiences, I spent a lot of time thinking deeply about the environment and marine conservation. Scotland, being coastal, has a lot of environmental protections for marine environments specifically. Scotland designated Marine Protected Areas, or MPAs, for conservation, heritage, and research purposes. Over 240 MPAs protect around 37% of Scotland's seas. This is huge for conservational efforts, as Scotland is home to a wide variety of species, some being endangered. And while there are many factors that play a part in the degradation of marine and coastal environments, like oil drilling and pollution, or trawling and poaching, countries like Scotland and even here in the US, there are things like MPAs or the EPA to protect the environment, because everything from whales and dolphins to algae and unassuming planktons have a place in the ecosystem. I would argue that the largest obstacle of conservation is the exploitation of the environment by way of capitalism. The unfortunate truth is that in a society built off of the exploitation of the environment, conservation just is not profitable. That being said, there are still ways that the government can intervene in the event of an attempt to destroy or diminish an environmental space, whether that be marine, coastal, or otherwise. In the US, there's a law called the Endangered Species Act from the 70s, which can halt or punish actions which will harm, harass, kill, or take an endangered species, plant, or animal. From all accounts, this law is still one of the most revolutionary additions to conservation efforts in the US, and even inspired a lot of the environmental protections enacted by other countries as well. There's more to it, though. If a new development is proposed where a taking can foreseeably take place, a full environmental workup must be conducted to figure out the extent of the effects, and a recovery plan to rehabilitate the environment would need to be drafted in order for the development to continue. So, while this act can effectively halt damage to ecosystems, it does not altogether roadblock it and ends up leaving open loopholes for people to get away with harming the environment against better judgment for their own profit. While in Tobermory, my group had the opportunity to sit down with Siobhan Moran, an expert from the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust, to hear about Scotland and their history with marine conservation. On the topic of profitability of environmentalism, this was really eye opening for the types of issues that one might not even assume would pop up. When asked about how public perception might affect the effectiveness of environmental campaigns, Miss Moran had this to say.
I could easily talk to you this entire time about how important plankton is and how like protecting plankton and protecting things like seagrass is really important. But you guys are already passionate about the natural world. If we want people who aren't already passionate to care about it, telling them about John Coe, one of our local killer whales, who we first saw in 1980. His dorsal fin is 2 meters high, which is from the floor to the top of that beam. That is just his dorsal fin. That we've seen him regularly eating porpoises, and that he's got a giant, like, cartoon-shaped bite out of his tail. Like, we can create an emotional connection with that in a way that you can't with yeah, maybe something microscopic in quite the same way. So yeah, these charismatic megafauna are a really important tool in conservation success.
So, everyone can agree that capitalism and public perception both play a huge role in how conservation efforts land. In the same way that lack of care and extra expenses can allow people to cut corners in taking care of the environment and fighting pollution, when people find something to care about, that interest can also be exploited at the expense of the very issue people supposedly care about. That's when I got to thinking more about my own experiences abroad and came to the startling realization that without even meaning to, I did the same thing. I spent a lot of time on boats and traveling around the west coast of Scotland to discover more about how to protect the oceans and coasts, and I considered myself to be acting in a respectful way. I threw away all my garbage and recycled at every opportunity. I learned about new research methods and issues I would have never guessed were negatively impacting marine environments. But the whole time, I was taking part in the exploitation of this seemingly selfless interest. Take the puffins, for example. They were so cute, and I was so excited to see some in person, yet my group spent hundreds of dollars sending us all onto a boat to go tour the sea, in which loud propellers disrupted the surface of the water and likely scared away any sea life that may have been nearby. And when I got there, I hiked up the rocky shores to go see the puffins from rather close up, where even in the moment I was shocked to see that the area that the puffins had to burrow and be undisturbed by tourists was unimaginably small. As you can see in this clip, there was a crowd of people right along these burrows as close to the partitioning rope as possible to take photos and look at the animals. Most of the puffins were on this huge rock, away from where people were able to walk, but I was able to sit down next to a few puffins on the edge of this cliff no more than 5 feet away from what are supposed to be wild animals. When I thought about this upon returning home, I immediately went into researching if this had the negative effects I would assume close proximity to wild animals would have. The assumption that this probably isn't good for the puffins is based on the widely known advice given in the US that you keep your distance from wild animals to protect both yourself and the animals from all sorts of threats. I found a report on the impact of visitor disturbance on Atlantic puffins breeding from the Center for Ecology and Hydrology. While the effects were not nearly as bad as I assumed initially, there was evidence that during the season of tourism to Puffin Islands, puffin breeding routines and activity is disturbed. Though the researchers do say they believe the puffins also compensate for the disruption in one way or another. So, despite what may be best for puffins, tourism to the island is both raising awareness for puffins while also disturbing their populations during burrowing season. Similarly, the dolphin and whale watching tour my group went on was hosted by the same company that took us to Lunga, Staffatours, in which the boat left early in the morning and navigated through the sea for the whole day in search of dolphins and whales. And we did find some. There was a 30-minute period where a bunch of dolphins were following alongside the boat and circling around and jumping out of the water, and I cannot even lie, this was actually super magical to experience in person, but ultimately it carries the same sort of concerns that the puffins brought about for me. A company is exploiting people's interest in popular large sea creatures like minke whales and dolphins to make money against what may be better for the environment and for the animals. For scenarios like this, there's a sort of limbo state I reach where, though I was not directly intending to harm the environment, I was still engaging in the exploitation of the very thing that I traveled across the globe to learn how to protect. At the end of this program, I think the biggest point of focus for the future of conservation, to ensure the sustainability of environmental efforts and interests, should be how can we study, support, and raise awareness for the conservation efforts of marine and coastal ecosystems without exploiting and disturbing the environment?